The Middle Ages are often imagined as a time of knights' castles and battles, yet behind the stone walls and beneath the religious strictness of the era, human desires found ways to express themselves in some of the strangest forms. While the Church preached morality and condemned lust, people across Europe invented, practiced, and even ritualized some of the most unusual sexual behaviors in history. These practices might seem bizarre, even shocking to us today, but in the context of the medieval world, they reveal a fascinating interplay between repression, superstition, and the unstoppable force of human sexuality. To understand these strange customs, we must first remember that medieval Europe was dominated by the Catholic Church, which controlled not only spiritual life, but also the laws and rules of everyday behavior. Sexual activity was meant to be confined strictly to marriage and reproduction. Yet, as history often shows, the stricter the rules, the more creatively people find ways around them. Forbidden pleasures became both a source of fascination and a form of rebellion, leading to behaviors that seem both shocking and, at times, darkly humorous. One of the most curious practices of the time was the so-called bundling tradition, found especially in parts of Northern Europe. In this custom, young couples were allowed to spend the night together in the same bed, but with a physical barrier between them, often a thick wooden plank or a tightly sewn sack that separated their bodies. Parents approved of this strange practice because it allowed intimacy without, in theory, risking pregnancy. But of course, where there is desire, boundaries are easily crossed. Historical records suggest that bundling often led to far more than innocent conversation, and communities were well aware of the risks. Still, the practice persisted for centuries as a strange compromise between social control and human longing. Another bizarre aspect of medieval sexuality comes from the widespread use of chastity belts. Though historians still debate whether they were ever truly common, the image of a metal belt locked around a woman's waist to prevent her from having sex has become one of the most infamous symbols of the Middle Ages. According to legend, knights would place these devices on their wives before departing for the Crusades, ensuring fidelity while they were away. In reality, most so-called chastity belts that survive today are likely from later centuries, often created as curiosities rather than functional objects. Yet the very idea reflects the medieval obsession with controlling female sexuality, turning desire into something dangerous that had to be locked away, sometimes literally. Equally strange were the rituals of trial by intimacy, which were often tied to accusations of witchcraft or adultery. In certain communities, women suspected of infidelity could be subjected to humiliating tests in which their bodies were examined by priests or midwives for supposed signs of immoral behavior. Some accounts describe bizarre ordeals, such as being forced to walk naked before villagers or having their private parts inspected for marks of the devil. These practices reveal not only the cruelty of medieval justice, but also the deep intertwining of sexuality, superstition, and fear. Medieval medical texts also reveal a strange world of sexual beliefs and prescriptions. Doctors of the time, influenced by ancient Greek and Roman writings, often claimed that women needed sexual release to maintain their health. Some even argued that female orgasm was necessary for conception, a belief that shaped both medical practice and marital expectations. Treatments for supposed hysteria in women included massages or herbal potions designed to stimulate pleasure, though always couched in the language of medicine rather than desire. Such practices show how sexuality could hide in plain sight, disguised as science, but motivated by the same human needs that have always existed. Equally peculiar were the sexual superstitions that guided daily life. In some regions, people believed that certain foods or charms could either increase fertility or dampen lust. For instance, eating roasted testicles of animals was thought to boost male virility, while drinking special herbal brews might calm excessive desire. Amulets, spells, and even pieces of the bodies of executed criminals were sometimes used as love potions, blurring the line between medicine, magic, and sexuality. These practices may seem grotesque today, but in the medieval imagination, where the spiritual and the physical constantly overlapped, they made perfect sense. And then there were the public festivals, where the boundaries of morality were temporarily suspended. Events like the Feast of Fools or certain carnival celebrations allowed people to mock the church, dress in outrageous costumes, and indulge in behaviors that were normally forbidden. Sexual role-playing, bawdy songs, and even public nudity were sometimes part of these rituals, offering a rare outlet for desires that had to remain hidden the rest of the year. In a society where lust was officially condemned, festivals became a safety valve, a time when the repressed could erupt in chaotic and often scandalous ways. When we look at these practices today, it is easy to dismiss them as primitive or laughable, but each strange custom reflects the same paradox that still shapes human sexuality, the tension between social rules and personal desire. In the medieval world, that tension took forms that might shock us: iron belts, magical potions, humiliating rituals, but they were all ways of navigating a world where the body could never be fully denied, no matter how harsh the laws of religion and society. Behind the curtain of religious authority, another side of medieval sexuality existed, one hidden in manuscripts, whispered rumors, and secret gatherings. While public morality was dictated by priests and enforced by law, in the private chambers of nobles and in the corners of taverns, people explored their desires in ways that shocked even their contemporaries. What survives today in forbidden texts, marginal drawings, and court records offers us a glimpse into practices that were both taboo and strangely creative. One of the most fascinating examples lies in the secret erotic art of the Middle Ages. Many illuminated manuscripts, religious books painstakingly decorated by monks, contain what are known as marginalia, small drawings in the borders of the text. To the casual reader, they may look like harmless doodles, but many are shockingly sexual. Rabbits dressed as priests chasing women, men exposing themselves, grotesque hybrid creatures engaged in intercourse. These bizarre images are scattered across holy books that were meant to inspire prayer and devotion. Why would monks draw such things? Historians suggest that these images may have been both a form of private humor and a symbolic way of expressing the ever-present struggle between piety and lust. Whatever their purpose, they remind us that even in the most sacred spaces, desire found its way onto the page. Beyond art, entire groups were accused of engaging in strange sexual rituals. Heretical sects, such as the Cathars or the followers of various mystical cults, were often rumored to practice orgies disguised as religious ceremonies. Whether these accusations were true or exaggerated by their enemies remains debated, but the very persistence of such claims shows how sexuality and heresy were linked in the medieval imagination. To accuse a group of deviants was not enough. One had to also accuse them of sexual corruption, of violating the sacred bond of marriage, of using lust as a form of worship. These rumors painted a picture of shadowy midnight gatherings where men and women supposedly abandoned all restraint, not only breaking moral law but mocking it. Even if largely inventions, they reflect the deep fear medieval society held toward uncontrolled desire. At the same time, medieval courts were filled with cases of sexual scandals that shocked communities. Nobles, despite their public image of piety, often indulged in affairs, seductions, and even bizarre fetishes. Some records describe lords who demanded unusual acts from their lovers or experimented with cross-dressing in the secrecy of their chambers. Others hosted banquets that turned into decadent feasts of both food and flesh, blurring the line between celebration and debauchery. While the church thundered against sin, the powerful often lived by different rules, protected by their status but still whispered about in scandalous tales. One of the strangest and most unsettling practices concerned the consummation rituals of certain marriages. In some noble households, after the wedding ceremony, witnesses would actually be present to ensure that the union was physically completed. Servants, relatives, or even priests might be required to watch the couple enter the marriage bed as proof of legitimacy. Though not always literal voyeurism, the idea that intimacy had to be supervised speaks volumes about the medieval obsession with lineage, inheritance, and control. For modern eyes, the thought of such invasions into private life seems shocking. Yet for medieval society, it was considered necessary to guarantee social order. Even darker were the sexual punishments reserved for those who broke the rules. Adulterers, prostitutes, and those accused of unnatural acts could face brutal consequences. Public shaming was common. A woman caught in adultery might be paraded through the streets half-naked, while men guilty of sodomy could face mutilation or execution. Yet at the same time, prostitution was paradoxically tolerated, even regulated in many cities. Brothels operated under municipal law, often located just outside church walls. Authorities argued that prostitution was a necessary evil, a way to protect honorable women from being pursued. These contradictions capture the strangeness of medieval sexuality, condemned in words, but managed and even encouraged in practice. One cannot ignore the influence of superstition in shaping medieval sexual life. For example, penis theft was a widely believed myth recorded in witch trials. According to testimonies, witches were said to magically steal men's genitals, keeping them in boxes or feeding them like small animals. Of course, these stories were products of fear and imagination rather than reality, but they reveal just how intertwined sexuality and magic were in the medieval mind. Witchcraft accusations frequently involved tales of sexual intercourse with demons, succubi, or incubi. The belief that lust could open the door to the devil was a powerful tool for control, turning natural human desires into evidence of spiritual corruption. Alongside these fears, there were also strange remedies and aphrodisiacs that bordered on the grotesque. Manuals of the time recommended consuming powdered animal bones, dried blood, or even parts of corpses to restore virility or inspire passion. Some believed that wearing the right amulet, such as the dried heart of a dove, could increase attraction, while others trusted in bizarre rituals like urinating through a wedding ring to cure impotence. These practices might strike us as absurd. But for medieval people living in a world without modern science, such rituals offered hope in the face of deeply personal anxieties. Perhaps the most paradoxical element of all was how laughter and sexuality often went hand in hand. Despite the strict moral codes, medieval people did not entirely avoid humor about sex. Comic tales, known as fabliaux, spread throughout Europe, full of bawdy jokes about lusty priests, cheating wives, and foolish husbands. These stories were enjoyed by both peasants and nobles, showing that even in a world ruled by sin and salvation, people still found amusement in the very desires they were told to fear. It was through laughter, satire, and storytelling that sexuality slipped past the censors and into the public imagination. The strange sexual practices of the Middle Ages remind us that repression never eliminates desire, it only transforms it. In the shadows of cathedrals, in the pages of sacred books, and in the hidden corners of daily life, sexuality continued to shape human experience in ways both shocking and strangely familiar. From chastity belts to erotic doodles, from love potions to public punishments, the medieval world was filled with contradictions that reveal the timeless tension between control and freedom, between fear and longing. As we approach the end of this strange journey through medieval sexuality, it becomes clear that the Middle Ages were not the dark, passionless centuries they are often imagined to be. Instead, they were a world where desire existed in constant tension with fear, morality, and authority. Every strange ritual, every superstition, every whispered story reveals how deeply sexuality was interwoven with religion, politics, and everyday survival. What seems grotesque or absurd to us today was, for them, a way of navigating the eternal human need for intimacy in a society that tried endlessly to control it. One of the most striking contradictions of the era was the Church's position on sex. On the one hand, priests and theologians preached that lust was one of the 7 deadly sins, capable of damning a soul to eternal fire. On the other hand, church writings contain a remarkable obsession with cataloging every possible sexual act, listing what was forbidden, what was tolerated, and what punishments were required. Some penitential manuals read almost like explicit instruction books, describing in meticulous detail what couples should and should not do. Ironically, in trying to repress sex, the church produced some of the earliest detailed records of human sexual imagination. The constant policing of desire did not erase it. It preserved it, in writing, for us to study centuries later. We must also consider the way power and sexuality were linked in medieval society. Kings and nobles often used marriage as a political tool, yet their private lives revealed a far more complex reality. Illegitimate children were common, mistresses often wielded influence behind the throne, and scandals involving forbidden liaisons could shake entire kingdoms. Sexual reputation mattered not only for individuals, but for dynasties. A queen accused of adultery risked not only her own life, but the legitimacy of her children, threatening the stability of the realm. At the same time, rulers sometimes indulged in elaborate sexual games that mocked the very morality they were supposed to uphold. These contradictions highlight how sexuality, even when hidden, shaped the course of history. For ordinary people, sex was equally bound up with survival and community. Fertility was essential for family life, and anxieties about infertility drove many to strange remedies and rituals. In some villages, couples struggling to conceive might perform symbolic acts in fields, hoping to invoke nature's fertility. Others sought help from local wise women, who prescribed potions made from herbs, animal parts, or even more unsettling ingredients. Sexuality was not simply a private matter. It was tied to harvests, inheritance, and the survival of entire families. In a world where death was constant and life fragile, the act of creating life carried both fear and reverence, often surrounded by practices that seem bizarre to us today. Another forgotten aspect of medieval sexuality lies in its connection to storytelling. Myths and legends frequently contained erotic undertones, from tales of knights tempted by seductive enchantresses to stories of saints resisting carnal temptation. Even the literature of courtly love, often celebrated as romantic, contained strong elements of desire and longing that challenged the strict boundaries of marriage. Troubadours sang of forbidden passion, and poets crafted verses about the intoxicating pull of lust. These cultural expressions gave people a way to explore their emotions in symbolic form, even if their real lives remained bound by social and religious restrictions. But perhaps the most enduring lesson of these strange practices is that sexuality can never be fully controlled. Despite chastity belts, public punishments, and endless rules, medieval people found ways to laugh about sex, dream about it, and indulge in it. Even in monasteries and convents, places dedicated to celibacy, scandals erupted, proving that human desire is never truly silenced. Whether through secret affairs, bawdy humor, or bizarre rituals, sexuality slipped through the cracks of repression, as unstoppable in the Middle Ages as it is today. When we step back and reflect, these odd practices also remind us of the shared humanity across time. While the details may seem alien, love potions made from animal organs, erotic drawings hidden in holy books, or festivals where order gave way to chaos, the underlying emotions are the same ones we know today: longing, jealousy, insecurity, passion, and joy. The medieval world may have dressed these feelings in strange costumes, but at their core they are universal. It is tempting to laugh at the absurdities of the past, to imagine how primitive or foolish medieval people must have been. Yet in doing so, we risk missing the deeper truth, that their struggles were not so different from ours. We too live in a world full of contradictions, where sex is both celebrated and stigmatized, where desire is both marketed and judged, where people search endlessly for ways to control what cannot be controlled. The medieval world, with all its bizarre customs, is not simply a curiosity. It is a mirror reflecting our own paradoxes in a distorted but recognizable form. In the end, the story of sexuality in the Middle Ages is not just about strange devices, humiliating punishments, or grotesque superstitions. It is about the resilience of desire in the face of repression. It is about how human beings, across all centuries, find ways to express what is most natural to them, even when the world tells them it is forbidden. From the monks' hidden drawings to the laughter of peasants at bawdy tales, from the whispered secrets of noble courts to the desperate remedies of villagers, we see the same truth. Sexuality is not an invention of modern times, but an eternal part of the human story. So the next time we think of the Middle Ages as dark, humorless, and repressed, we should remember this hidden history. Beneath the armor and the prayers, beneath the sermons and the punishments, people were still human, strange, passionate, inventive, and endlessly curious about pleasure. And in their strangeness, they remind us of our own.